A wrong number is usually a dead end. But for a desperate single mother and a lonely billionaire, a misdialed plea for help becomes an unexpected lifeline, and the start of a love that would change both their lives forever. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The rain on the corrugated iron roof of Amarachi's one-room apartment in a Jagunal was a relentless, deafening drumbeat, perfectly matching the frantic, panicked rhythm of her own heart. In the dim light of a single flickering bulb, her shoulders shook not from the damp cold that seeped through the cracks, but from the sheer, crushing weight of a world collapsing around her. On the thin mattress in the corner, her 3-year-old triplets, Chitty, Chima, and Kizaram, slept fitfully, their tiny bodies huddled together for warmth under a threadbare wrapper. The sight that usually filled her with purpose now only amplified her despair. The landlord's final warning note, crumpled and damp from her tears, was clutched in her hand. Final notice: eviction in 48 hours. She had been dismissed from her petty trading spot at the Mile 12 market that afternoon for owing too many association fees. The meager savings hidden in a cracked ceramic cup, her hope fund, were gone, spent on the last packet of Gary that now sat empty on the floor. Desperation was a bitter taste in her mouth, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She needed to call her Auntie Grace in the village, to swallow her pride and beg for a loan, any amount, just to see another week. The phone felt like a lead weight in Amarachi's damp palm. Each crack on its screen seemed to mirror the fractures in her spirit. The numbers on the keypad were faded, some nearly rubbed away entirely from years of use. She brought up Auntie Grace's number from memory, a sequence etched into her mind from countless calls pleading for patience, for understanding, for a little more time. Tears blurred her vision, transforming the faint numbers into shimmering, indistinct dots. A sob caught in her throat, making her hand jerk. She pressed the call button, not seeing that her trembling thumb had pressed a 5 instead of a 6, and a 4 instead of a 7. She just prayed. To God, to her ancestors, to any benevolent force that might be listening. The phone trilled its weak, tinny ringtone, a sound drowned out by the pounding rain on the roof. Once, twice, then a voice, deep, calm, and laced with an authority that was innate, not forced. It was a voice that belonged in quiet, carpeted offices and boardrooms, not on the other end of a desperate call from a leaking room in a Jagunal. Yes? Kola speaking. The voice was so unexpected, so utterly foreign to her world, that for a second, Amarachi froze. But the dam of her despair had already broken. The words, practiced in her head for Auntie Grace, tumbled out in a raw, gasping rush, directed at this unknown man. Auntie Grace, Baiko knew. She wept, the honorific slipping out instinctively. It's Amarachi. They will throw us out tomorrow. The landlord, he has given his final warning. Her voice hitched, another sob wrenching free. My children, achinik me. They have not eaten properly today. The Gary is finished. The cup is empty. I have no one else to call. Baiko, Auntie Grace, if you can send just 5,000 naira. Just 5. I will pay you back. I swear on my mother's grave. I will work and pay you back double. I just need a little help to breathe. She finally paused, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto the phone's cracked screen. She expected Auntie Grace's familiar, weary sigh, followed by a litany of her own problems and a reluctant promise to try and send something small. The silence on the other end was different. It wasn't the silence of reluctance or judgment. It was heavy, thoughtful listening. It stretched for a beat too long, long enough for a sliver of confusion to pierce through her panic. Then, the voice again. Its tone shifted. The sharp edge of business was gone, replaced by a surprising, measured gentleness. I am afraid you have the wrong number. The words were a bucket of ice water. Reality crashed down upon her with a sickening lurch. Her breath caught. She had just poured her deepest, most shameful vulnerabilities onto a complete stranger. Humiliation burned her cheeks, hotter than any fever. I am so sorry, sir, she stammered, her voice now small and brittle. Please forgive me for disturbing your peace. I don't know what. Please, forgive me. Her fingers fumbled for the end call button, a frantic need to sever this excruciating connection, to hide from her mistake. Wait, the single word was spoken softly, yet it carried an undeniable force that froze her trembling finger. It was not a command born of arrogance, but one of compelling curiosity, and something else, something like concern. Don't hang up, the man named Kola said. His voice was like a steadying hand in her freefall. Tell me your name. Tell me where you are. And in that moment, stripped of all pride, standing at the absolute edge of hope, Amarachi found she had no strength left to disobey the calm, compelling voice on the other end of her wrong number. The command, wait, hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of her panic. Amarachi's finger, poised over the end call button, trembled violently. Every instinct screamed at her to terminate this profound embarrassment, to retreat into the familiar solitude of her suffering. Hanging up was the logical, the safe thing to do. She was a woman who had learned to expect scorn or indifference from a world that had shown her little else. But the voice, it held no trace of the annoyance or mockery she feared. Instead, it was layered with a quiet intensity, a gravity that demanded attention. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to, yet it was not harsh. It was, she realized with a jolt, kind. Don't hang up. The words were simple, but they held her captive. It was the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had asked her to stay, to not disappear. The fragile ember of hope, which she had tried so hard to extinguish, flickered stubbornly back to life, fanned by the unexpected gentleness in a stranger's tone. Tell me your name. Tell me where you are. It was not a demand, but an invitation, an offer to be heard. And in her utter exhaustion, her spirit scraped raw from the relentless struggle, Amarachi found she had no defenses left. The walls she had built around her heart crumbled under the weight of a simple, compassionate request. Her voice, when it came, was a broken whisper, barely audible over the drumming rain. Amarachi, she breathed into the phone, as if confessing a secret. My name is Amarachi Nwachukwu. She paused, taking a shaky breath that rattled in her chest. To give her location was to make her vulnerability tangible, to pin her despair to a map. Yet she did. I am in a jagunal, off Cemetery Road, near the canal, the yellow face me I face you building, upstairs. She described her world in the only terms she knew, terms that would paint a vivid picture of her poverty for this man who undoubtedly lived in a world of Ikoyi estates and Victoria Island penthouses. And then the story began to spill out. It started in fits and bursts, haltingly at first, but the dam had been breached. She spoke of Chaik, her beloved husband, his laughter silenced by a reckless driver on the third mainland bridge, leaving her pregnant and alone. She spoke of the terrifying, miraculous birth of the triplets, Chitty, Chima, and Kizaram, and the overwhelming joy that was instantly shadowed by sheer terror. She told him of selling off her few valuables, of the petty trading, of the relentless chase for daily bread, of the landlord's threats that grew louder with each passing month. She spoke of the empty Gary cup, a symbol of her ultimate failure. She didn't ask for anything more. She had already asked a stranger for 5,000 naira. The shame of that alone was a burn on her soul. She simply unburdened herself, her words weaving a tapestry of a life defined by love, loss, and a relentless, grinding struggle. Through it all, the man named Kola was silent. But it was an active silence. She could feel him listening, could almost sense him processing each word, each muffled sob. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened, and in doing so, granted her a dignity she hadn't felt in years. When her words finally dwindled into quiet tears, his voice returned, calm and decisive, cutting through the static of the poor line and the noise of her breaking heart. Stay where you are, Amarachi. The instruction was clear, firm. Lock your door. It was a command that spoke of a world aware of dangers she faced daily. "I will be there in an hour." Click. The line went dead. Amarachi slowly lowered the phone from her ear, staring at its darkening screen until it faded to black. The silence in the room was suddenly deafening, broken only by the soft breathing of her children and the relentless rain. Had that just happened? Did a man with a voice like polished teak just tell her he was coming to a jagunal in the middle of a rainstorm because Shed cried on the phone to him? It was surreal, a scene from one of the Nollywood movies the women in the compound watched on crowded generators. A part of her, the pragmatic survivor, whispered that it was a cruel joke, that no one was coming, that she had just exposed her deepest shame for nothing. But another part, the part that had responded to the undeniable sincerity in his tone, held onto that tiny, defiant ember. She pushed herself up from the floor, her legs weak. Moving on autopilot, she walked to the door and slid the flimsy bolt across. It was a futile gesture against any real threat, but she had been told to lock it, so she did. She then went to the window, wiping a clear spot on the fogged-up glass with the edge of her wrapper, and peered out into the wet, dark alley. She waited. The minutes stretched, each one feeding the gnawing doubt. But for the first time that night, she was not waiting for an eviction notice. She was waiting for a possibility. However improbable, however insane, she was waiting for a miracle named Cola. The 60 minutes that followed were the longest of Amarachi's life. They stretched and contorted, each tick of the cheap plastic clock on the wall a hammer blow to her fragile nerves. She paced the small room, her bare feet silent on the cool cement. She stopped to add just the wrapper over her sleeping children, her fingers lingering on their warm cheeks, as if to reassure herself that this potential miracle or cruel joke was for them. Every sound from the compound below made her jump. The slam of a neighbor's door, the raised voice of a couple arguing, the splash of a motorcycle through a puddle. Each time, her heart would leap into her throat, and Shed rushed to the window, wiping a new peephole in the condensation to stare down into the muddy, waterlogged courtyard. Doubt was a vicious serpent coiling in her stomach. "What are you doing, Amarachi?" It hissed. "A man like that does not come to a place like this. He heard your story, felt a moment of pity, and said what he thought would calm a hysterical woman. He is not coming. You have made a fool of yourself." She almost believed it. The rational part of her mind knew it was the only logical conclusion. Yet, the memory of his voice, that calm, authoritative certainty, held the doubt at bay. He had not sounded like a man who made empty promises. Then she saw it. Not the beat-up sedans or noisy Okadas that populated her world, but a vehicle so large, so silent, and so profoundly black it seemed to absorb the faint light of the compound. A Range Rover. It navigated the narrow alley with an impossible grace, its powerful engine a low hum against the rain's percussion. It was like watching a panther navigate a chicken coop. It pulled to a stop directly below her window, and the compound, for a moment, fell silent. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. Faces appeared, eyes wide with disbelief. The driver's door opened first. A uniformed man emerged, holding a large black umbrella aloft before swiftly moving to open the passenger door. And then he emerged. Kola Adebayo unfolded himself from the vehicle, ducking his head slightly under the low-hanging eaves of the open corridor. He was taller than she had imagined. His agbada, a stunning creation of deep indigo damask with subtle silver embroidery, was impeccably tailored, speaking of a quiet, exorbitant wealth that was worlds away from the loud, flashy displays she sometimes saw. It was fabric that had never known the smell of dust and mildew. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping the surroundings with a neutral, assessing look that took in everything without a flicker of judgment. He didn't see a slum. He saw a topography, a problem to be understood. He said a few quiet words to his driver, who nodded and opened the rear door to retrieve an armload of heavy-looking grocery bags. The sight was so surreal. This man, this car, these bags full of food in her waterlogged compound, that Amarachi felt dizzy. A firm, confident knock sounded on her door. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of the landlord or the timid tap of a neighbor. It was the knock of someone who expected to be answered. Her breath caught in her throat. Her palms were slick with sweat. For a terrifying second, she considered not answering. She could hide in the dark, pretend she wasn't home, and let this surreal dream pass by her door. But the memory of her children's hungry whimpers steeled her resolve. With a trembling hand, she slid the bolt back. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. She pulled the door open, just a crack, her body hidden behind it. He was there, in the flesh. He seemed to fill the narrow, dank corridor, his presence so large it compressed the very air around him. Up close, he was even more imposing. His features were sharp, intelligent, with a hint of sternness that was softened by the surprising warmth in his eyes. Those eyes didn't glance at the peeling paint or the rusted nails. They found hers through the crack in the door and held them. "Amarachi?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been on the phone, a deep rumble that vibrated in her bones. She could only nod, her voice utterly lost. She pushed the door open wider, an unspoken invitation. Kola Adebayo stepped into her world. The room seemed to shrink further around him. He had to duck his head slightly to avoid the low ceiling. He stood just inside the doorway, his gaze making a slow, deliberate circuit of the single room. It took in the single mattress on the floor, the three small forms huddled together, the empty Gary cup on the floor, the cracked linoleum, the single bulb with its dangling pull string. He absorbed it all without a single change in his expression. There was no pity, no disgust, no horror. There was only a profound, thoughtful silence. Then his eyes returned to her, tracing the tracks of dried tears on her cheeks, taking in the proud, defiant set of her shoulders even in her utter humiliation. In that moment, he didn't see a victim. He saw a monument of endurance. "I brought food," he said simply, his voice a low, grounding rumble that cut through the overwhelming surrealism of the moment. It was the most understated, powerful sentence she had ever heard. He gestured with his head, and the driver began bringing in the bags, placing them carefully on the small table. The sheer volume was staggering. It wasn't just sustenance. It was abundance. It was security. It was a week of tomorrows where her children would not cry from hunger. Amarachi stood frozen, watching this silent, efficient operation unfold in her tiny home. She was a spectator in her own life, watching a miracle unpack groceries on her rickety table. The serpent of doubt uncoiled and vanished, replaced by a wave of such overwhelming, knee-weakening gratitude that she had to reach out and steady herself against the wall. Kola's eyes followed the movement, sharp and perceptive. "Sit," he instructed gently, not as an order, but as a concern. "Please, you've had a shock." And for the second time that night, Amarachi Nwachukwu, who had shouldered every burden alone for years, found herself obeying the quiet command of a stranger who had walked into her life and, in one moment, begun to change everything. Amarachi sank onto the room's sole chair, a rickety wooden thing whose legs wobbled precariously under her weight. She felt lightheaded, her mind struggling to process the scene unfolding before her. The driver, a man of few words and efficient movements, finished placing the last bag on her small table, which now bowed under the weight of its unexpected bounty. With a silent, almost imperceptible nod to Kola, he retreated, pulling the door closed softly behind him, leaving the two of them alone in the dim, humid room. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people from diametrically opposed worlds suddenly occupying the same small space, trying to find a new equilibrium. Kola remained standing, not out of arrogance, but because there was literally nowhere else to sit. He leaned slightly against the wall by the door, his imposing frame seeming to absorb the room's shadows, making the space feel both smaller and somehow safer. His eyes were not on the groceries, nor were they scanning the room with morbid curiosity. They were on her. He watched as she stared at the bags, her expression a turbulent mix of overwhelming gratitude, deep shame, and sheer disbelief. "You should eat something," he said, his voice low, breaking the silence without shattering it. "You need your strength." The practical words shook her from her stupor. Eat. It was such a basic, fundamental need. It was the core of her crisis mere minutes ago. Now, the solution to that crisis was piled high on her table. Nodding almost mechanically, she rose and moved to the bags. Her hands, still trembling, reached in and pulled out a packet of spaghetti, a tin of tomato paste, 2 plump onions, and a sachet of groundnut oil. She moved to her kitchen, a small kerosene stove on a wooden crate in the corner, and began to prepare a meal. The actions were rote, a ritual of survival she performed daily, but tonight it felt different. Felt like a sacrament. The familiar sizzle of onions hitting hot oil filled the room, a homely sound that starkly contrasted with the extraordinary circumstances. Kola didn't offer to help. He seemed to understand instinctively that this was her domain, her act of reclaiming control. Instead, he did something far more valuable. He listened. "Tell me about them," he said, his gaze shifting to the sleeping triplets. Their names. The question was so simple, yet it unlocked something in her. It wasn't about her poverty or her struggle. It was about her joy. A small, genuine smile touched Amarachi's lips for the first time that night. "That is Chitty," she said, pointing to the one closest to the wall. "He is the quiet one, the thinker, always watching. He will take a toy apart just to see how it works." Her voice gained a little strength. "The one in the middle is Chima, a troublemaker," she said with a fondness that belied the words. "All laughter and noise. He falls down 10 times a day and gets up laughing 11 times. She nodded to the one on the edge, curled near her pillow. "And that is Kizaram, my daughter, my heart. She has her father's smile. She is the peacemaker, always trying to make her brothers stop fighting." As she spoke, stirring the tomato paste into the onions, she told him more. She spoke of Chaik, not with the pain of his loss that she had poured out on the phone, but with the warmth of his memory. She told him how Chaik would have spoiled Kizaram rotten, how Head dreamed of teaching the boys to play football. She spoke of her own abandoned dream of fashion design, how she would sketch designs on any scrap of paper she could find, her fingers itching to create beauty. Kola listened, utterly captivated. He heard the love that underpinned every story, the fierce intelligence in her observations, the unwavering hope that had somehow survived years of being battered down. He saw the woman behind the tears, a storyteller, a devoted mother, a dreamer. The bags of groceries were a band-aid on a wound. This, her story, was the medicine. When the simple, aromatic jollof spaghetti was ready, she served 2 plates. It felt absurd, offering a billionaire a meal worth less than the petrol that brought him here. But it was all she had to give. To her astonishment, he accepted it without hesitation. He took the plate, and since there was no table, he remained leaning against the wall, eating with a quiet appreciation that felt like the highest compliment. He didn't offer her empty platitudes or grand promises. He asked thoughtful questions. "Where did you learn to sketch? What does the Market Association charge? What school do they attend?" She realized, assessing the architecture of her struggle, identifying the load-bearing walls and the points of failure. When he finished eating, he placed the empty plate carefully on the crate. He looked around the room again, but this time his eyes were those of a strategist, not a spectator. "This leak in the roof," he said, pointing to a dark, damp stain on the ceiling. "How long has it been there?" "Since last rainy season," she admitted, embarrassed. He nodded, filing the information away. "The landlord, his name?" She told him, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Was he going to confront the man? The thought was terrifying. But Kola just nodded again, his expression unreadable. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, black device that seemed to belong to another century compared to her own, and typed a few brief notes. He then looked at her, his gaze direct and earnest. "The job I mentioned, at my foundation, it is real. It is not pity. We need people with resilience, with intelligence, people who understand real community needs. You would be an asset." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed it. He was offering her not a fish, but a fishing rod, and doing it in a way that made it sound like he would be the lucky one. Finally, he pushed himself off the wall. "It is late. You need to rest." He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. "Lock this behind me. I will have my driver call your phone tomorrow morning. Be ready at 8. We will begin. The word echoed in the small room long after he was gone. Amarachi slid the bolt across the door, her mind reeling. The smell of spaghetti and tomato paste hung in the air, a testament to a meal shared. The room was still small, still leaky, still poor. But it was no longer a place of despair. It was a place where a miracle had eaten dinner and spoken of the future. And for the first time in years, Amarachi dared to believe that future might include her. The morning after the storm dawned bright and clear, the relentless rain replaced by a searing Lagos sun that steamed the water from the rusted corrugated iron roofs. Inside her room, Amarachi was already awake, dressed in her best. A simple, faded blue wrapper and a clean, if threadbare, yellow blouse. The triplets, sensing a shift in the air, were unusually alert, their eyes wide as they watched her move with a purpose they hadn't seen in months. The previous night felt like a dream, a vivid, impossible fantasy. But the evidence was all around them. The bags of groceries stood like a proud citadel on her table. The empty plates from their shared meal were washed and stacked. The memory of Kola Adebayo's calm, imposing presence was etched into the very fabric of the room. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the old phone vibrated on the crate with a sound that made her jump. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she answered. "Good morning, madam." It was the driver's voice, polite and professional. "I am parked at the entrance of the compound." "Good morning. We are coming," Amarachi said, her voice barely a whisper. She gathered the children, her hands trembling as she wiped Chima's face for the third time and tried to smooth down Kizaram's stubborn curls. They were a package deal. Where she went, they went. She prayed this wouldn't be an issue. Stepping out into the compound was like walking onto a stage. Neighbors paused in their morning routines, their eyes wide with open curiosity and gossip. The sight of the imposing black SUV, its engine purring like a contented leopard, was the most exciting event of the month. Amarachi kept her head high, shepherding the children quickly, her cheeks burning under the weight of their stares. The driver, a man named Tund, greeted her with a respectful nod and opened the rear door. The interior of the car was a world of cool, silent luxury. The triplets froze, their eyes like saucers, intimidated by the pristine cream leather seats. It was Chima who broke first, scrambling in with a gasp of delight. The others followed, their little hands patting the soft seats in awe. The drive to Victoria Island was a silent, surreal journey. Amarachi watched the chaotic, vibrant streets of Ajagunal gradually give way to the wide, clean boulevards and towering glass buildings of the island. The children pressed their faces to the tinted windows, silent for once, overwhelmed by the scale of a Lagos they had never seen. Tund pulled up in front of a modern, gleaming glass tower bearing the discreet logo of the Adebayo Foundation. "We are here, madam," he said, coming around to open her door. Stepping out onto the polished marble sidewalk, Amarachi felt a wave of paralyzing insecurity. Everyone moving in and out of the automatic glass doors was dressed in sharp suits and elegant corporate attire. She looked down at her faded wrapper, feeling like a pebble in a diamond store. Tund, perceptive, seemed to understand. "This way, madam. Mr. Adebayo is expecting you." He led them through the lobby, a vast, air-conditioned space with art installations and the quiet hum of efficiency. Eyes followed their little procession, the impeccable driver, the woman in traditional wear from the mainland, and 3 wide-eyed children. Amarachi held Kizaram's hand tightly, her palms sweating. They were ushered into a private elevator that whisked them silently to the top floor. The doors opened directly into a spacious, sun-drenched anteroom. A poised executive assistant named Funmi sat behind a vast desk, her smile warm and immediately disarming. "Mrs. Nwachukwu, welcome. Mr. Adebayo is in a brief meeting. He asked that you wait in his office. Can I get anything for the children? Juice? Biscuits?" Before Amarachi could refuse, Funmi had produced a box of expensive-looking shortbread biscuits and 3 small boxes of ribena. The triplets, their shyness evaporating at the sight of sugar, accepted them with quiet, reverent thanks. Funmi showed them into Cola's office. It was not what Amarachi expected. It was spacious and commanding, with a breathtaking view of the Atlantic Ocean. But it was warm. Books lined the shelves, not just for show, but well-read, their spines cracked. African art and sculptures were placed thoughtfully around the room. It was the office of a thinker, a man of culture, not just a businessman. A few minutes later, the door opened and Cola walked in. He was on the phone, dressed in a crisp, tailored navy blue suit that made him look every inch the powerful billionaire. He finished his call with a few sharp, decisive words, and then his focus shifted entirely to them. His stern expression softened into a genuine smile as he looked at the children, now contentedly munching biscuits on his large leather sofa. "I see you've made yourselves at home. Good." He then turned to Amarachi. "You came," he said, and there was a note of quiet pleasure in his voice, as if Head half expected her not to. "You told me to," she replied, her voice small. He smiled properly then, a transformative thing that lit up his entire face. "So I did. Come, let's talk." He didn't sit behind his monumental desk. He pulled 2 chairs together near the sofa, creating an intimate circle. He asked her questions, not about her poverty, but about her skills. What did she enjoy doing? Was she good with people? Could she organize? Was she patient? He listened intently to her halting answers, then nodded. "The foundation runs a community outreach program. We need a liaison, someone who can talk to people in the communities we serve, understand their real needs, and help translate that into actionable projects for us. It requires empathy, honesty, and a great deal of patience. I think you would be perfect for it." He made it sound like a real job, a necessary one. He outlined a salary that made her head spin. It was more than 5 times what she had ever dreamed of making. It came with health insurance for her and the children. "The hours are flexible," he continued, his eyes flicking to the triplets. "We can arrange for a creche here in the building, or you can work around their schedule. This is about building a foundation for you, Amarachi. A stable one. This job. It's the first step." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of a profound, disbelieving gratitude. He wasn't just giving her money. He was giving her back her agency. He was offering her a ladder and telling her she had the strength to climb it. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll start on Monday," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, yet his eyes were kind. She nodded, unable to form words. "Good. Tund will take you home. He'll pick you up on Monday at 8. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. As she shepherded the biscuit crumb-covered children toward the door, he added, "And Amarachi? The contractor will be at your apartment this afternoon to assess the repairs. Let him in." She just nodded again, her mind reeling. Repairs. A job. A future. The drive back to a Jagunal was different. The same streets looked less like a prison and more like a place she was passing through on her way to somewhere else. She looked at her children, their faces smeared with chocolate and joy, and for the first time in a very, very long time, Amarachi Nwachukwu allowed herself to believe that the foundation of her life was finally, truly, being rebuilt. The transformation of Amarachi's life over the following month was so profound it felt like living in a different reality. The contractors had come, as promised, and worked with a quiet, astonishing efficiency. The leaks were sealed, a new window was installed, filling the room with light, and the walls were painted a fresh, clean white that made the space feel new and full of potential. The small fridge hummed contentedly in the corner, a constant, reassuring sound of stability. Her first weeks at the Adebayo Foundation were a steep learning curve. Funmi, the executive assistant, became her patient and invaluable guide, teaching her how to use a computer, manage emails, and navigate the unspoken rules of corporate life. The work itself, liaising with community leaders for the Foundation's projects, was challenging but deeply fulfilling. She found her voice, her innate empathy and understanding of grassroots needs making her a natural. She was not a charity case. She was, as Cola had said, an asset. Cola himself was a constant, steady presence. Their interactions were mostly professional, conducted in the office or through brief, logistical phone calls. Yet, the connection forged on that rainy night hummed between them, an unspoken understanding. He checked in on her progress not as a micromanaging boss, but as an invested mentor. He'd ask after the children, remembering their names and their distinct personalities with an attention to detail that never failed to surprise her. One Friday afternoon, as she was preparing to leave, Funmi buzzed her. "Amarachi, Mr. Adebayo would like to see you before you go." A flutter of nerves, now a familiar sensation, went through her. She smoothed down her new outfit, a modest, professional dress she'd bought with her first paycheck, and walked to his office. He was standing by the vast window, looking out at the ocean, his hands in his pockets. He turned as she entered. "Amarachi, the children, do they have any plans tomorrow?" The question was so unexpected she blinked. "Plans? No, sir. No plans." "Good," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I've found that children, especially ones with that much energy, require occasional expeditions. Tund will pick you up at 9 tomorrow. Wear something comfortable." "An expedition?" she asked, completely thrown. "A surprise," he clarified, his tone leaving no room for further questions. "See you tomorrow." The triplets were a whirlwind of excited speculation the next morning. When Tund arrived, not in the formal Range Rover but in a more comfortable, spacious SUV, their cheers could probably be heard across the compound. As they drove, the familiar cityscape began to change. The air coming through the vents began to smell different, salty, fresh, wild. Chima was the first to shout, "Water! Big water!" They had reached the entrance to Tarqua Bay, the car boarding a ferry to cross to the secluded beach. The children were practically vibrating with excitement, their noses pressed to the glass as the boat chugged across the blue expanse. The beach itself was a slice of paradise. White sand, gentle waves, and far fewer people than the main Lagos beaches. Tund laid out a large umbrella and comfortable loungers while Kola, dressed in simple linen trousers and a polo shirt, looked more relaxed than Amarachi had ever seen him. For a moment, the children stood frozen at the edge of the water, intimidated by the vast, roaring ocean. It was Kola who broke the spell. He took off his shoes, rolled up his trousers, and walked right into the surf, letting the waves crash around his ankles. He turned back to them, a challenge in his eyes. "Well, is the great Atlantic Ocean too much for the mighty triplets of a juggunnal?" That was all the provocation they needed. With whoops of delight, they charged into the water, their initial fear forgotten in a heartbeat. What followed was an afternoon of pure, unadulterated magic. Kola, the formidable billionaire, was completely transformed. He built sandcastles only for Chitty to accidentally stomp on them with a gleeful cackle. He held Kizaram's hands, teaching her to jump over the incoming waves, her shrieks of laughter mixing with the sound of the sea. He let Chima climb onto his back for a horsey ride into the water, the little boy hands clinging to his shoulders, his face a mask of ecstatic terror. Amarachi watched from her lounger, her heart feeling so full it might burst. This was more than philanthropy. This was participation. He wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was in the trenches, getting soaked and sandy, fully engaged in the simple, profound joy of making 3 children deliriously happy. He looked up at one point, catching her watching him. He had seaweed on his shoulder and sand in his hair. He grinned, a wide, unguarded, boyish grin that made him look 10 years younger. In that moment, he wasn't Kola Adebayo, powerful business magnate. He was just Kola, a man playing in the ocean. He waded out of the water and walked towards her, dripping onto the sand. "Your turn," he said, his voice warm. "My turn for what?" "To have fun. You've been on duty long enough." He extended a wet, sandy hand to her. "Come on. The water's perfect." Hesitantly, she took his hand. His grip was firm, sure. He led her to the water's edge where the children immediately swarmed her, pulling her into their games. For the next hour, she forgot everything. She forgot her past struggles, her new job, the vast social chasm between her and the man laughing beside her. There was only the sun on her skin, the cool water, the weightless joy of being pulled under a wave by her children, and the solid, reassuring presence of Cola nearby. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they sat together on the sand, watching the triplets search for shells. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the day's happiness. "Thank you," Amarachi said softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the waves. "This day, they will never forget this." Cola looked at her, his expression thoughtful in the dying light. "Neither will I," he said, his voice low and sincere. In that moment, on a beach with the sound of her children's laughter as a soundtrack, Amarachi felt the careful, professional boundaries they had built begin to dissolve. Something new was washing in with the tide, something warm, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying. And as she met his gaze, she knew with a thrilling certainty that he felt it too. For a moment, the children stood frozen at the edge of the water, intimidated by the vast, roaring ocean. It was Cola who broke the spell. He took off his shoes, rolled up his trousers, and walked right into the surf, letting the waves crash around his ankles. He turned back to them, a challenge in his eyes. "Well, is the great Atlantic Ocean too much for the mighty triplets of a juggernaut?" That was all the provocation they needed. With whoops of delight, they charged into the water, their initial fear forgotten in a heartbeat. What followed was an afternoon of pure, unadulterated magic. Cola, the formidable billionaire, was completely transformed. He built sandcastles only for Chitty to accidentally stomp on them with a gleeful cackle. He held Kizaram's hands, teaching her to jump over the incoming waves, her shrieks of laughter mixing with the sound of the sea. He let Chima climb onto his back for a horsey ride into the water, the little boy hands clinging to his shoulders, his face a mask of ecstatic terror. Amarachi watched from her lounger, her heart feeling so full it might burst. This was more than philanthropy. This was participation. He wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was in the trenches, getting soaked and sandy, fully engaged in the simple, profound joy of making 3 children deliriously happy. He looked up at one point, catching her watching him. He had seaweed on his shoulder and sand in his hair. He grinned, a wide, unguarded, boyish grin that made him look 10 years younger. In that moment, he wasn't Cola Adebayo, powerful business magnate. He was just Cola, a man playing in the ocean. He waded out of the water and walked towards her, dripping onto the sand. "Your turn," he said, his voice warm. "My turn for what? To have fun. You've been on duty long enough." He extended a wet, sandy hand to her. "Come on. The water's perfect." Hesitantly, she took his hand. His grip was firm, sure. He led her to the water's edge where the children immediately swarmed her, pulling her into their games. For the next hour, she forgot everything. She forgot her past struggles, her new job, the vast social chasm between her and the man laughing beside her. There was only the sun on her skin, the cool water, the weightless joy of being pulled under a wave by her children, and the solid, reassuring presence of Cola nearby. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they sat together on the sand, watching the triplets search for shells. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the day's happiness. "Thank you," Amarachi said softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the waves. "This day, they will never forget this." Cola looked at her, his expression thoughtful in the dying light. "Neither will I," he said, his voice low and sincere. In that moment, on a beach with the sound of her children's laughter as a soundtrack, Amarachi felt the careful, professional boundaries they had built begin to dissolve. Something new was washing in with the tide, something warm, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying. And as she met his gaze, she knew with a thrilling certainty that he felt it too. The beach outing was a seismic event, not just in the lives of Amarachi and the children, but in the carefully ordered world of Cola Adebayo. Driving away from the shore, with the children asleep in the back, exhausted and sandy, a profound sense of peace settled over him. It was a feeling so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't the satisfaction of a closed business deal or the quiet pride of a successful philanthropic endeavor. This was deeper, simpler, more fundamental. It was the contentment of a day well spent, of laughter shared, of seeing unadulterated joy on the faces of 3 children and their remarkable mother. He began to integrate them into his life in small, deliberate ways. It started with dinners, not at 5-star hotels, but at quiet, family-friendly restaurants with large booths and forgiving staff. He learned which child liked chicken and which preferred fish. He discovered that Kizaram would only eat her jollof rice if it had no green peppers, and that Chima would try to negotiate for ice cream before Head even looked at the main course. Kola, the master negotiator, found himself utterly charmed by a 3-year-old's flawed tactics. He took them to the Lekki Conservation Center, walking the canopy walkway with Cheetah's small, trusting hand clutched tightly in his. He watched, his heart in his throat, as the boy peered down through the grating at the forest floor below, not with fear, but with a quiet, scientific curiosity. "It's like being a bird, Uncle Kola," Chitty had whispered, and the observation had struck Kola as profoundly wise. He started dropping by her apartment unannounced, but not without calling first. A lesson in respect he instinctively knew was vital. He'd bring a book for Chitty, a new football for Chima, a beautiful doll with braidable hair for Kizaram. For Amarachi he brought practical things, a better kerosene stove, a sturdy new fan, a set of high-quality pots and pans. They were gifts that said, "I see your life and I want to make it easier, not I want to dazzle you." The office dynamic shifted subtly. Their professional interactions were still there, but they were now underpinned by a shared, private history. A look across a meeting room could convey an entire conversation about a difficult community elder they dealt with that morning. He'd sometimes call her into his office under the pretense of discussing a project, only to ask if Chima's cough had improved or if Kizaram had liked the storybook He'd given her. The whispers started, of course. Lagos high society was a small, vicious fishbowl. "Did you see Kola Adebayo at Terra Culture with a woman and 3 children? Looked like a ready-made family," someone would murmur at a gallery opening. "I heard she works for him. In his foundation," another would reply, the word foundation dripping with implication. "Very convenient. She's from a Jagunal, you know. Quite a project he's taken on." The comments reached him, filtered through well-meaning friends and annoyed associates. He dismissed them all with a wave of his hand or a cold stare that shut down further discussion. He had never cared for the opinions of Lagos socialites, and he cared for them even less now. One evening, his oldest friend and most trusted confidant, Tund, a different Tund from his driver, came to his house for a drink. Tund leaned back in his chair, swirling the brandy in his glass. "So, Kola," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "The talk is getting louder. People are curious. Who is this woman who has the great Kola Adebayo building sandcastles?" Kola took a slow sip of his drink. "Her name is Amarachi Nwachukwu. She is one of the strongest, most intelligent people I have ever met. And those children, they are extraordinary." Tund watched him, his expression thoughtful. "That's not an answer to my question, my friend. I see the way you look when you speak about them. This is different." Kola was silent for a long moment, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. He thought of Amarachi's laughter on the beach, the fierce determination in her eyes when she talked about her dreams of design, the way she carried her past struggles with a grace that humbled him. "It is," he admitted quietly, the 2 words feeling like a monumental confession. "It is entirely different." He wasn't just her benefactor anymore. The realization had been creeping up on him for weeks, but saying it out loud made it real. He wasn't fulfilling a charitable impulse or assuaging a guilty conscience. He was a man captivated. He was falling in love with her strength, her resilience, her humor, and the beautiful family that came with her. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. It was a complication he had never sought, a vulnerability he had never allowed himself. But as he sat there, the memory of her smile vivid in his mind, he knew with a certainty that dwarfed all his business acumen that this was a risk he was willing to take. He was no longer just rescuing her. He was, to his own astonishment, joining her. For Amarachi, The gilded cage of Cola's world was both breathtaking and increasingly suffocating. The dinners, the gifts, the casual drop-ins, each act of kindness was a stone dropped into the still pond of her life, and the ripples were becoming waves that threatened to capsize her fragile sense of self. The whispers that reached Cola's ears found their way to hers in a far more vicious form. They came from the sideways glances of impeccably dressed women at the restaurants he took them to, their eyes sweeping over her carefully chosen, yet undeniably modest, dresses with cold assessment. They came in the subtly condescending tone of a shop assistant in a high-end mall where Cola had insisted on buying the children new shoes. "Of course, madame," the woman had said, the title dripping with mockery as her eyes flicked from Amarachi's worn handbag to the children's excited faces. They even came from her own neighborhood. The envy was palpable. "See her now, she don't forget her mates," a woman from down the compound muttered just loud enough for her to hear as Tun's SUV pulled away one morning. "She don't enter better thing. Let's see how long it will last." But the most damaging whispers came from inside her own head. They were the voice of the survivor, the pragmatist who had learned to trust nothing but the certainty of struggle. "He pities you," the voice hissed late at night as she lay in her now comfortable bed. "You are a fascinating project for a man who has everything. A real-life charity case he can touch. Men like him do not marry women like you," it continued, its logic cold and brutal. "They play with them. They install them in apartments and visit when they are bored with their real lives among their own kind. You are an amusement, a diversion. Remember who you are. A widow from a jugunal with 3 children. He is Cola Adebayo. This is a fantasy. When he tires of playing family man, he will disappear, and you will be left here, but it will be worse because you will have gotten used to the light. How will you survive in the dark again after this?" The fear was paralyzing. It was easier to live in lack than to risk this unimaginable happiness only to have it snatched away. The potential fall from this height would shatter her completely. She began to pull back. It was subtle at first. When Cola called to suggest a weekend drive to the Lekki Arts Market, she declined, citing a need to catch up on laundry. She knew he could have the laundry done for her with a single phone call. The excuse was flimsy, a test. She noticed the flicker of confusion in his eyes during their office interactions, the slight hesitation before he spoke, as if recalibrating. Her heart ached at the faint shadow of hurt she thought she saw, but the voice of doubt screamed that it was just her imagination, that she was inflating her own importance to him. The breaking point came during a dinner at a quiet restaurant. Chima was being particularly boisterous, and Kizaram spilled a full glass of water across the table. As Amarachi flustered, mopping up the mess with napkins, her face burning with humiliation, she caught the eye of an elegant woman at a nearby table. The woman didn't smirk or look away. Instead, she offered a small, sympathetic smile. But to Amarachi, in her heightened state of anxiety, it looked like the pinnacle of condescending pity. Cola, meanwhile, had simply signaled the waiter for more napkins and was calmly helping Kizaram with her now-wet menu, completely unruffled by the chaos. His ease with it all, his seamless existence in this world that was so alien to her, suddenly felt like an unbridgeable chasm. On the drive home, the children asleep in the back, the silence in the car was heavy. She stared out the window at the bright lights of Victoria Island, feeling like an imposter in a glass coach that would turn back into a pumpkin at the stroke of midnight. "You've been quiet lately," Cola said, his voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation laced with concern. "Is everything all right? Are the children okay?" "The children are fine," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Everything is fine." He was quiet for a moment, navigating the traffic. "It doesn't seem fine," he said gently. "It seems like you are a million miles away." She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't live in this agonizing limbo. It was better to break the illusion now on her terms than to wait for him to do it. She took a shaky breath, her hands clenched in her lap. "Cola, all of this," she gestured vaguely, encompassing the car, the restaurants, the new clothes, the repaired apartment. "It is too much. I don't know how to be in this world. I don't understand the rules." She turned to look at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of fear and frustration. I am a woman from a jugunal with 3 children. You are. You. This. Whatever this is. I don't understand it. I am scared of misunderstanding your goodness. I am scared of. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Of confusing your kindness for something it is not. The words hung in the air, a confession of her deepest insecurity. She had laid her fear bare, bracing herself for the inevitable, gentle letdown. She expected him to confirm her doubts, to say, "You're right. Let's keep this professional." It would hurt, but it would be a clean hurt. A familiar one. She stared out the window again, waiting for the blow to fall, already beginning the painful process of building her walls back up, brick by bitter brick. The shadow of doubt had spoken, and she had listened. Now, she waited for the world to confirm its cruel truth. The SUV was a cocoon of tense silence, the hum of the engine the only sound besides the frantic beating of Amarachi's heart. She had said it. She had flung her deepest, most vulnerable fear into the space between them, and now she waited for the impact. She stared unseeingly at the passing lights of the Lekki-Ikoyi Link Bridge, each one a blurry streak against the dark lagoon. Her body braced for the gentle, final rejection. Kola didn't speak immediately. He didn't offer a quick, placating reassurance. Instead, he took a long, slow breath, his hands steady on the steering wheel. He guided the car off the main road, onto a quieter, tree-lined street in Ikoyi, and pulled over into a secluded spot overlooking the water. He cut the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. The only light came from the moon glinting on the water and the soft dashboard glow that illuminated the sharp planes of his face. He turned in his seat to face her, his movement deliberate. Amarachi, he began, his voice low and serious, devoid of its usual easy confidence. It was the voice he used in his most important meetings, the one that commanded absolute attention. Look at me. The command was gentle, but undeniable. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned her head. Tears she hadn't realized had escaped were tracing hot paths down her cheeks. In the dim light, his expression was intense, his gaze searching hers, not with anger or pity, but with a profound earnestness. Do you see pity in my eyes? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She tried to look away, but he reached out, his fingers gently cupping her chin, forcing her to hold his gaze. His touch was electric, sending a shock through her system. It was firm, yet incredibly tender. Look at me, he repeated, softer this time. Tell me what you see. What she saw dismantled her defenses one by one. She saw no trace of the condescension she feared. She saw no impatience with her insecurities. Instead, she saw a raw, startling honesty. She saw a man who was himself, perhaps for the first time since she'd known him, completely unmasked. I see a woman who fascinates me, he said, answering his own question when she remained silent, her voice trapped in her throat. I see a strength that humbles me every single day. You talk of my world as if it's something superior. You have no idea that your world, the one you built from nothing with your own 2 hands, is 1,000 times more impressive than any boardroom I've ever commanded. He dropped his hand from her chin, but his eyes never left hers. You think I don't know my own mind? You think I am a man who is led by pity? Amarachi, I built an empire by trusting my gut, by seeing value where others saw none. And my gut, my every instinct, tells me that you are the most valuable, most real thing that has happened to me in a decade. He shook his head, a faint, frustrated smile touching his lips. You are not a project. A project is a building, a business proposal. You are a person, a woman, a force of nature. You are not a diversion from my real life. For the first time in a long time, you are making me feel like I have a real life beyond spreadsheets and bottom lines. He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne, something clean and woody, filling the space between them. Do not insult my intelligence or my character by believing that my time, which is the one commodity I can never get more of, is something I would waste on a mere kindness. I am not that charitable. The words were blunt, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. They weren't pretty platitudes. They were a fierce, passionate defense of his own intentions and a stunning affirmation of her worth. He wasn't dismissing her fear. He was dismantling it with the precision of a master strategist. "I am scared," she admitted in a small voice, the final confession. "I know," he said, his voice softening. "So am I." The admission shocked her. "You? What are you scared of?" "Of moving too fast and frightening you away," he said without hesitation. "Of not being enough for you and those 3 incredible children. Of this connection I feel. Being one-sided." He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "I negotiate billion-naira deals without breaking a sweat. But the thought of you pulling away from me terrifies me." In that moment, the last of her walls crumbled to dust. The billionaire was gone. In his place was just Kola, a man laying his own vulnerabilities bare beside hers. The chasm she had imagined between them vanished. They were just 2 people, on a dark street, afraid of losing something precious before it had even truly begun. He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't make any grand gesture. He simply reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His hand was warm, strong, and sure. "Let's just take this one day at a time," he said, his thumb stroking a gentle rhythm across her knuckles. "No expectations, no pressure. Just you, me, and the troublemakers. Let's see where it goes. Can we do that?" Amarachi looked down at their joined hands, a symbol of a new partnership, a new understanding. The shadow of doubt receded, not gone forever, but banished for now by the sheer force of his sincerity. She squeezed his hand back, a tentative, hopeful smile finally touching her lips. "Yes," she whispered, her voice firm for the first time that night. "We can do that." The conversation in the car was a turning point. A door unlocked and pushed open. The air between them cleared, the unspoken tension replaced by a new, thrilling current of possibility. Kola, true to his word, did not press or overwhelm her. Instead, he began a quiet, deliberate campaign of courtship, one that was respectful, patient, and laser-focused on winning not just her heart, but the hearts of her children. He became Uncle Kola in earnest. He learned the intricate rules of the triplets' favorite cartoon, sitting on her repaired floor to watch it with them, asking surprisingly insightful questions about the characters' motivations. He arrived one Saturday morning with 3 small, brand-new football jerseys. He told them with a solemnity they adored, for their official training. The ensuing training session in the compound courtyard, with Kola demonstrating utterly terrible goalkeeping skills while Chima celebrated every goal as if he'd won the World Cup, was a masterpiece of bonding. He supported her dream not as a benefactor, but as a believer. He discovered the old, battered sketchbook she hid under her mattress, filled with designs, elegant twists on traditional Ankara, modern cuts with classic Nigerian flair. He didn't just praise them, he acted. "There's a fashion academy in Yaba," he mentioned casually one evening, handing her a prospectus he'd had fund me research. "They have a weekend program for aspiring designers. I thought you might be interested." The opportunity was a dream she had buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it. Tears filled her eyes as she flipped through the pages. "Kola, the cost, the time, is manageable," he finished for her, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The foundation has a vocational scholarship fund. You more than qualify, and we will manage the schedules. This is not a gift, Amarachi. It's an investment in undeniable talent." Enrolling in the academy was like giving water to a parched plant. Amarachi bloomed. She came alive in a new way, her eyes sparkling as she talked about pattern drafting and fabric sourcing. Kola would listen, fascinated, as she explained the difference between Dutch wax and Java print, her passion transforming her, making her even more radiant. He began to include her in his world in a new way, not as a curiosity, but as a partner. He asked her opinion on a proposal for a new community outreach initiative, genuinely listening to her feedback about what would actually work on the ground. He valued her mind, and in doing so, he gave her a confidence that was more valuable than any material possession. The pinnacle of this new phase came when he took her to a vacant lot in the heart of a jugunal. It was a place she knew well, a dumping ground that was also a popular shortcut. Standing there, amidst the rubble and the buzzing flies, he unrolled a set of architectural blueprints. This, he said, his voice filled with a quiet excitement, is the new project. The Adebayo Foundation Community Center and Vocational Academy. Amarachi looked at the complex, beautiful designs. There were spaces for adult literacy classes, a computer lab, a health clinic, and a large, well-lit wing labeled Creative Arts VE Design. It's wonderful, she breathed, her heart swelling at the thought of such a place in her community. Then he pointed to the design wing. The head of the design program will, of course, need to be someone with real-world experience, a passion for teaching, and a deep understanding of the community. Someone who can spot talent in a young girl sketching on a scrap of paper and give her the tools to thrive. He looked at her, his eyes shining. I was inspired by a certain resilient woman. I was hoping you might consider the role, once you've completed your own training. Amarachi stared at him, then back at the blueprints, her vision blurring with tears. This wasn't a handout. This wasn't a lonely apartment in a fancy neighborhood. This was a legacy. He was building the future she had dreamed of, not just for her, but for countless others like her. He had seen the deepest desire of her heart, to create, to empower, to give back, and he was building a foundation for it to stand on. In that moment, on a dusty, litter-strewn lot that was about to be transformed, any lingering doubt in Amarachi's heart vanished completely. This man did not see her as a project from a juggernaut. He saw her as a muse, a partner, an equal. He wasn't trying to pull her into his world. He was weaving her dreams into the fabric of his own, creating a new, richer tapestry that included them both. She didn't know what the future held, but as she looked from the blueprints of a dream to the man who had dared to dream it with her, she knew with absolute certainty that her heart was no longer her own. It had been quietly, completely, and irrevocably won. 6 months had woven a new reality for them, a tapestry rich with shared routines, inside jokes, and a deepening, unshakable bond. The triplets now spoke of Uncle Cola's house as a second home, a place of sprawling gardens, a library they were allowed to explore, and a cook who would always, without fail, have a plate of freshly baked chin-chin waiting. Amarachi had flourished at the Design Academy, her natural talent honed into a formidable skill. Her sketches were now precise patterns. Her understanding of fabric was professional, and a quiet, steady confidence had replaced her former self-doubt. She and Cola were a team. They discussed her classes, his business challenges, the children's school progress, and the plans for the community center with an easy familiarity that felt as natural as breathing. One Friday evening, Tund picked her and the children up from the academy. Mr. Adebayo asked that you come straight to the house, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He said to dress comfortably. When they arrived at the Ikoyi mansion, Funmi was waiting at the door, her smile warm. The children are with me tonight, she announced, shepherding the excited trio away. We have a movie and pizza planned. You two go on up. Puzzled but amused, Amarachi walked through the quiet house. The staff seemed to have vanished. She found her way to the sweeping staircase that led to the master suite. But as she reached the top, she saw that the large, ornate doors to the balcony were wide open. The sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. The balcony had been transformed. Dozens of small, flickering lanterns and candles were arranged around the space, their light reflecting off the dark glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows and dancing in the evening breeze coming off the Atlantic. The usual furniture was gone, replaced by a single, small table set for two, draped in fine white linen. In the center was a simple, stunning arrangement of white orchids and purple lilies. The air was filled with the soft, melodic strains of a slow, romantic high-life song from a hidden speaker. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Cola. He wasn't in one of his powerful suits. He wore a simple, elegant agbada of off-white linen, the fabric soft and inviting. He looked both incredibly handsome and utterly approachable. In his hands, he held a single, perfect white orchid. You remember our first dinner? He said, his voice a soft rumble that blended with the music. He gestured to the table where a familiar, comforting sight awaited. 2 plates of simple jollof spaghetti. I thought we should commemorate it." Tears of joy pricked at Amarachi's eyes as she laughed. "You remembered." "I remember everything about that night," he said, his gaze intense. He pulled out her chair for her, and they sat, eating the simple meal under the stars, surrounded by candlelight. They talked and laughed, the conversation easy, but Amarachi could feel a new tension in the air, a sweet, anticipatory electricity. When they had finished, Kola stood and took her hand, leading her to the edge of the balcony where the lights of Lagos twinkled like a carpet of diamonds below them. The ocean whispered its ancient song in the darkness. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip sure. The playful light was gone from his eyes, replaced by a seriousness, a vulnerability she had only seen once before, in a car on a dark night. "Amarachi," he began, his voice low and filled with emotion. "That wrong number was the most right thing that has ever happened to me. You called out in your darkness, and by some divine grace, I answered. You trusted a stranger with your deepest pain, and you gave me the privilege of being a part of your healing." He took a deep breath, his thumbs stroking the backs of her hands. "You and those 3 beautiful children have brought a light, a purpose, and a joy into my life I never knew I was missing. You've shown me a strength I can only aspire to and a love that is pure and selfless. You didn't want my money. You wanted a chance to stand on your own. And in doing so, you've built something in me, a better man." He slowly released one of her hands and reached into a pocket of his agbada. He didn't kneel. He stood before her as her equal, his eyes locked on hers, and held up a ring box. When he opened it, the light from the lanterns caught the stone within, but it wasn't a blinding diamond. It was a magnificent, deep green emerald, surrounded by a delicate halo of smaller diamonds. "An emerald," he whispered, "for resilience, for new beginnings, for the lush, beautiful future I see with you." He finally, slowly, sank to one knee, looking up at her, his expression laid bare with love and hope. "Amarachi Nwachukwu, will you let me love you, provide for you, and stand by you for the rest of our days? Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to stop. The music, the city sounds, the ocean, everything faded into a distant hum. All that existed was this man, this moment, this breathtaking, overwhelming question. Tears streamed freely down Amarachi's face now, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked at the ring, a symbol so perfectly chosen it felt like he had reached into her soul. She looked at his face, so open and vulnerable, the powerful billionaire brought to his knees by his love for her. She didn't need to think. She didn't need to doubt. Her heart, so fiercely guarded for so long, answered for her. She nodded, her voice a choked, happy whisper. "Yes, Kola. Yes, 1,000 times yes." A brilliant, breathtaking smile broke across his face. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose, pulling her into his arms. He held her tightly, as if he would never let go, his face buried in her hair. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other and the glow of 1,000 lights, the city beneath them bearing witness, Amarachi knew that her long, hard winter was finally, truly over. Spring had come. The news of Kola Adebayo's engagement didn't just ripple through Lagos society. It sent a seismic shockwave through it. The gossip columns, which had traded in whispers and sly insinuations for months, now had a confirmed, earth-shattering fact to dissect. The billionaire was not playing philanthropist. He was marrying the single mother of triplets from a jugunal. The planning began in a whirlwind, but Kola was clear on one thing. This would be their day, a reflection of their unique story, not a performance for the city's elite. Amarachi, with her newly honed design skills and innate sense of style, took the lead, her vision supported by a team of the best wedding planners in Lagos who quickly learned to defer to the bride's impeccable taste. The ceremony was not held in a cathedral or a 5-star hotel ballroom. Kola had a vast, beautiful event space at the Adebayo Foundation's new headquarters transformed into a lush, botanical garden. It was a symbolic choice, a celebration of new growth and community. The guest list was a fascinating mix. Captains of industry and government ministers sat beside market women from Mile 12 and elders from Amarachi's compound in a jugunal. The air hummed not just with chatter, but with the palpable energy of a story that felt like a shared fairy tale. The day dawned bright and clear. In a quiet room of the mansion, surrounded by Funmi and a few close friends from her old life, Amarachi was dressed for her wedding. But she was not wearing a European-style white gown. Her outfit was her own design, her masterpiece. She wore a breathtakingly elegant iro and buba made not from lace, but from the finest snow-white Swiss voile, overlaid with hand-embroidered silver thread that traced intricate, delicate patterns reminiscent of traditional uli art. The geli, a masterpiece in itself, was sculpted into a stunning, elegant crown that framed her face without overshadowing it. She looked regal, radiant, and utterly, authentically herself, a Nigerian queen stepping into her destiny. Down the hall, the triplets were preening in their miniature, perfectly tailored igbatas and a gorgeous, tiny version of their mother's dress for Kizaram. They were not just attendants. They were co-stars of the day, their excitement infectious. The music began, not Wagner's bridal chorus, but a soul-stirring, live rendition of Obimemo by a renowned high-life artist. The doors at the end of the aisle opened, and there she was. A collective gasp swept through the congregation. She was a vision of serene, powerful beauty. On her arm was not a relative, but the oldest man from her compound in a jugunal, who had looked out for her after Chaik died, a proud tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. But all eyes, including Kola's, soon shifted from the breathtaking bride to the procession ahead of her. Chidi, Chima, and Kizaram, holding small, woven baskets of petals, began their walk down the aisle. They had been instructed to scatter the petals gently. Chima, in a fit of uncontainable joy, decided a full-bodied, enthusiastic toss was better, showering the front-row guests with a blizzard of petals, his grin wide and unrepentant. The congregation erupted in warm, loving laughter. Chidi, ever the serious one, rolled his eyes at his brother but kept his own scattering precise and orderly. Kizaram, beaming with angelic pride, held her basket like the precious treasure it was, carefully placing one petal at a time on the ground. It was perfect. It was them. It was real. Then, Amarachi began her walk. Her eyes found Kola's at the end of the aisle and never left. He stood tall and impossibly handsome in a rich, deep blue agbada embroidered with silver to match her outfit. But it was his expression that stole her breath. He wasn't just smiling. He was gazing at her with a look of such profound love, awe, and unwavering devotion that it seemed to create a force field around them, shutting out the hundreds of guests. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears, his composure as a billionaire completely shattered by the overwhelming love for his bride. As she reached him, he didn't wait for the officiant. He reached out and took both her hands, leaning in to whisper, his voice thick with emotion, "You are so beautiful. You have utterly destroyed me." The traditional and Christian ceremonies blended seamlessly, a tribute to both their faiths and heritage. When it was time for the vows, they spoke not just of love and honor, but of partnership and resilience. They spoke of building a future together, of cherishing the family they were creating. And when the officiant finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Kola cupped her face with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes and kissed her. A kiss that was a promise, a seal, and a new beginning. The reception was a vibrant, joyful explosion of music, color, and dance. The triplets, fueled by cake and excitement, became the life of the party, dragging uncles and aunties onto the dance floor. Kola, usually so reserved, didn't leave Amarachi's side, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, his face lit with a happiness everyone could see was genuine. As they moved through the crowd, receiving blessings, Amarachi caught sight of Auntie Grace, her face beaming with pride. She squeezed Kola's hand. He looked down at her, and she nodded toward her aunt. He winked, a silent, intimate reminder of a rainy night, a broken phone, and a wrong number that had set this entire, incredible day in motion. It was more than a wedding. It was a testament to destiny. It was a celebration of the fact that sometimes the most beautiful connections are found in the most broken places, and that love, when it is real, doesn't see barriers. It only sees possibilities. Life in the Adebayo mansion was not the stiff, formal affair Amarachi had sometimes feared. It was a vibrant, often chaotic, and deeply loving symphony of blended worlds. The quiet, polished halls that had once echoed only with the measured steps of staff now thrummed with the pounding of little feet, the shrieks of laughter from impromptu football matches, and the serious, whispered consultations of Lego architects. The triplets, Chitty, Chima, and Kizaram, adapted with the breathtaking resilience of children. The vast space became their playground, the gardens their personal jungle, and the library a treasure trove of adventures. But Kola, with a wisdom that continually amazed Amarachi, ensured they never lost touch with their roots. Weekends often included trips to a Jagunal to play with old friends, and they frequently visited the community center, a constant reminder of where they came from and the importance of giving back. Kola himself was transformed. The stern, imposing billionaire seemed to shed a layer of his formality at the front door each evening. He became Daddy K, a title he wore with more pride than any business accolade. He attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with science projects, though Chitty often had to correct his equations, and endured countless tea parties with Kizaram and her dolls, his large frame folded awkwardly onto a tiny chair, a look of utter devotion on his face. He found a joy in the mundane chaos of family life that his previous world of high-stakes deals could never provide. Coming home to a hug around his legs, a drawing taped to his study door, or the sound of Amarachi's laughter from the kitchen was his new definition of success. For Amarachi, the transition was a journey of self-discovery. She was no longer Amarachi, the struggling widow from a Jagunal. She was Mrs. Adebayo, a title she learned to carry with a grace that was entirely her own. She managed the household not as a passive beneficiary, but as its heart, infusing it with her warmth and practical wisdom. She hosted dinners for Kola's associates, her natural empathy and intelligence disarming even the stuffiest of guests. She was his partner in every sense of the word, her perspective often providing him with insights he would have otherwise missed. Her true passion, however, flourished at the Adebayo Foundation Community Center. True to his word, Kola had ensured the design wing was a state-of-the-art facility. And true to hers, Amarachi became its driving force. Amara Designs was born, not just as a vocational school, but as a thriving social enterprise. She taught young women and men from underserved communities the art of fashion design, from sketching to business management. Her own label, Amara by Amarachi, featuring her stunning modern Nigerian designs, quickly gained a cult following, its success funding scholarships for her students. She was a boss, a mentor, and an inspiration. She would often bring the triplets to the center after school, letting them play in the courtyard while she taught. They grew up seeing their mother not just as their mom, but as a creator, a leader, a force. Their love story became a quiet legend in Lagos, a testament to destiny's strange and wonderful plans. But for Kola and Amarachi, the magic wasn't in the grand gesture or the dramatic rescue. It was in the quiet moments. It was in the way he'd bring her a cup of tea exactly as she liked it when she was up late working on a new collection. It was in the way she'd gently smooth the worry from his brow after a difficult day. It was in their shared smiles across a crowded room, a silent conversation that needed no words. It was in the way they honored their past. On the anniversary of the day she'd made that fateful call, they would order jollof spaghetti from a local restaurant and eat it on a blanket on their balcony, laughing about how far they had come. One such evening, years later, with the children asleep downstairs, they stood together on that same balcony where he had proposed. The lights of Lagos twinkled below, a constant, pulsing heartbeat. Amarachi leaned her head against Kola's shoulder, his arm wrapped tightly around her. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "What if I had hung up the phone?" Kola was silent for a moment, holding her closer. "I think about it every day," he admitted, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "And I thank God every day that your finger slipped on that keypad." He turned her to face him, his expression serious in the moonlight. That wrong number didn't just lead me to you, Amarachi. It led me to myself. It led me to this life. It led me home. He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that held the memory of every struggle, every joy, and every shared dream. Theirs was a story not of a rescue, but of a mutual salvation. It was a story that began not with a ring, but with a call, a wrong number that had led to the most right love either of them could ever have imagined. And as they stood together, wrapped in the warmth of their hard-won happiness, they knew their new chapter was still being written every day in the language of their shared and beautiful life.